Hey there, I'm Bill Gisclair-Sullivan, founder and senior director at Meditate School of Mindfulness and Sound, and author of the Recipe Book of Life. And welcome to the Recipe Book of Life podcast. I'm so grateful you're here. Today, we're exploring one of the most powerful ingredients in the Recipe Book of Life, the sacred pause. Now, I know the word pause can sound simple, almost too simple, like we already know how to do it. And technically, we all know how to pause. We can pause a movie, we can pause a song, we can pause before answering a question when we're trying to look thoughtful. We pause in the doorway because we have no idea why we walked into the room. That too is a kind of mindful pause, a confusing one but still. But the sacred pause is something deeper. It's not just about stopping, it's returning. It's the moment between stimulus and response. It's the breath before reaction. It's the space before the old recipe takes over. It's the quiet inner doorway where we get to ask, is this who I want to be in this moment? Is this what truth is asking me? Is this what love would do? So before we go any further, let's begin with a pause together. Not a dramatic one. Not the kind where everyone wonders if the Wi-Fi went out. Not a pause where we try to become suddenly serene, glowing, and impossible to annoy. Just a human pause. An arrival. So wherever you are right now, let yourself arrive a little more fully. Feel the body you brought with you today. Not the body you're trying to improve, not the body you're negotiating with, not the body you're giving a performance review to, which, by the way, most of us do far too often. Just this body, this faithful body, this body that's carried you into this moment. Take a gentle breath with it, and then let it out slowly. Take another gentle breath with it. Take another gentle breath in with it. And this time on the exhale, allow your shoulders to just soften and relax. Let your jaw unclench. Take a couple more breaths in your own time. Let the space behind your eyes become a little quieter. And then if it feels right, place a hand on your heart or your tummy, or simply let your attention rest gently inside the body. And quietly say to yourself, I am here, now. Not perfectly here, not magically peaceful, not suddenly free from every opinion or irritation or craving or fear or unfinished conversation living rent-free in your head, just here. And for this moment, here is enough. Take one more breath in and exhale nice and slow. And allow these to be our intentions as you say to yourself, may I learn to pause before I abandon myself. May I learn to breathe before I repeat the old pattern. May I learn to listen before I react. And may this pause become a doorway back to truth, love, and presence. Take in a nice comfortable breath again. Exhale nice and slow. So today, let's talk about the sacred pause. Because if presence is the first ingredient, the sacred pause may be the spoon that helps us stir everything differently. Without the pause, most of us live on autopilot. And I say that with great compassion because automatic isn't always bad. Automatic helps us function. Automatic lets us brush our teeth, drive familiar roads, make a cup of coffee, fold laundry, and autopilot allows us to perform many of the daily tasks without needing to hold a full committee meeting inside of our head before we do it, and thank goodness. Can you imagine if you had to consciously instruct yourself through every step of making coffee? Lift the cup, place the cup, pour the coffee. Don't pour it on the counter, pour it in the cup. Excellent. And if it's something you like, add a little cream, but not too much. Well, too late, there's too much there. We need automatic patterns. But the problem is that some of our emotional patterns become automatic too. The tone of a voice of someone who triggers us. An email arrives. A text message sits there with a period at the end and suddenly it feels hostile. Someone doesn't respond quickly enough. Someone responds too quickly. Someone says, we need to talk, which should frankly come with a warning label and perhaps a small blanket. And before we know it, the body's reacted. The nervous system's made a prediction based on what happened in the past. The old story suddenly enters the room. And we're no longer responding to what's happening now. We're responding from history. And this is where the sacred pause matters. The pause gives us a chance to notice what's happening in me now. Not just what happened out there, but what's happening in here. What's happening in my body? Did it tense up? What's happening in my breath? Did it get deeper or shallower? What's happening in my chest? Is my heart pounding harder or is it softening? In my belly and my throat and my jaw? What's happening in my thoughts? What old recipe card have I pulled out? Because so often, the moment itself is only part of what we're reacting to. The rest is memory. The rest is pattern. The rest is a younger version of ourselves saying, I know how this feels. I know this danger. I know this is rejection. I know this silence. I know I'm going to be disappointed. I've been in this room before. And suddenly, we're not only in the present moment, we're in every moment that ever felt like this one before. And this isn't a character flaw. It's the nervous system doing what the nervous system does. It's trying to protect us. It's scanning, it's predicting, it's remembering. It's saying, I've seen something like this before, and I would like to file a report about it immediately. But the sacred pause gives us enough space to read the report without letting it run the entire meeting. That's transformation. It's not the body shutting down. It's not pretending we're calm. It's not spiritually bypassing the reaction. It's not saying, I am fine, through clenched teeth, while the body's clearly preparing for a full theatrical production. The sacred pause says, let me listen first. Let me breathe. Let me notice. Let me come back to now. In the SVMT method, we speak of transformation through the somatic, vibration, mindful, and trance-informed pathways. Well, the sacred pause touches all four. Somatically, the pause brings us back to the body. We notice the breath, the shoulders, the hands. We notice the tummy and the gut, the throat, the contraction. We notice the heat and the numbness. The urge to speak, fix, explain, defend, run like heck, or collapse. Or send the longest text message ever written by a person who later wishes they had waited 10 minutes. Vibrationally, the pause lets us feel the tone of the moment. What energy is here? Is there fear? Is there pressure? Is there urgency? Is there the energy of my old shame? Is there truth rising? Is there love trying to move through the reaction? Mindfully, the pause gives awareness a place to enter. We become aware of the thought, aware of the story. We notice the impulse. We notice the breath. And in the trance-informed awareness helps us ask, is this response coming from the present moment or from an old inner state? Am I reacting as the adult I am now or the child I used to be? Or has an old recipe taken over? That question alone can change everything. Because we can't change what we don't notice, and we can't notice if we never pause. Well, the sacred pause is the tiny hinge on which a new life can open. And it doesn't always feel dramatic. It doesn't need to be dramatic. In fact, most of the time it feels almost too small to matter. One breath, one moment of placing your hand on your heart, one decision to say, I have to think about this. One moment of saying, let me come back to myself before I continue. But small definitely doesn't mean insignificant. As I said before, a teaspoon of salt can change the whole recipe. But if you've accidentally added too much, you know that tiny things aren't always tiny. One pause can change the conversation. One breath can change the tone. One moment of awareness can prevent us from handing the steering wheel to an old wound. And I want to say this gently. The sacred pause isn't the same as silence. Silence can be sacred, but silence can also be avoidance. Silence can be wisdom, but silence can also be fear wearing a very calm outfit. The sacred pause isn't about swallowing the truth. It's about creating enough space to speak truth with love. And that distinction matters, because many of us were taught to confuse peace with quiet. We thought that peace meant never upsetting anyone. We thought that kindness meant making sure everyone else was comfortable. We were taught that spirituality meant rising above our own feelings, which often meant pushing them down into the basement and hoping they learned to meditate. They don't. Feelings in the basement don't become enlightened. They become louder. They become heavier. They start moving the furniture around. Well, the sacred pause doesn't ask us to suppress what's true. It asks us to meet what's true before we express it. It asks us to breathe before we react. It asks us to listen before we defend. It asks us to feel before we perform. It asks us to notice whether we're about to speak from love or fear, history or protection, resentment, or the very convincing voice that says, I need to make my point right now or I'm going to burst into flames. We've all been there. Well, the sacred pause isn't passive. It's profoundly active. And it's not weakness, it's strength with breath behind it. It's not hesitation, it's alignment gathering itself. And sometimes, yes, the pause does lead to softness. Sometimes it does lead to silence. Sometimes it leads to an apology, and sometimes it leads to a boundary. Sometimes it leads to me speaking my truth and telling that person why they just offended me. Sometimes it leads to walking away, because sometimes, what's the point, right? Sometimes it leads to saying, I need a moment before I respond. Or, I want to answer this carefully. Or, something in me is activated, and I don't want to speak from that place. Whew, what a relief that would be. Or, if we're being very honest, I need to take a breath before my mouth tries to run my entire life. That is spiritual maturity. It's not perfection. It's not speaking from a mountaintop. It's speaking from truth. It's not never reacting. It's not never getting triggered. Definitely not. It's about noticing sooner. It's about returning faster. It's about sprinkling in a little bit of curiosity. It's about repairing more honestly. And it's about making a more conscious choice. In the recipe book of life, the sacred pause is a chapter and an ingredient because it changes what we add next. Because without the pause, we may add more fear, or more defensiveness, or more hurrying, or more resentment, or a little bit more people-pleasing, or a lot more self-abandonment. With the pause, we might add something different. Curiosity, maybe some patience, maybe a true kindness, maybe a boundary or humor or humility, which, by the way, is very useful when we realize we may not have been completely right. I know, tragic. But sometimes, transformation requires the death of our most dramatic inner attorney. You know the one who has all the exhibits, all the screenshots, the perfect PowerPoint, the one who has a timeline, who takes tone analysis, and has a full closing argument prepared way in advance, and a deep commitment to proving that we were not only right, but spiritually right. Well, the sacred pause says, thank you, counselor. Let's breathe before we proceed. This is why the pause is sacred, because it brings choice back into the room. It lets the adult return. It lets the heart speak before the wound takes over, and it lets the body be heard without making the body the only voice. And I want to be clear. There are times when immediate action is needed. The sacred pause isn't about delaying necessary protection. If there's danger or harm or a clear boundary violation, the most sacred pause may be swift and direct. But in the everyday moments where our old patterns try to take over, the conversation, the email, the family dynamic, the partner's tone, the inner critic, the moment of anxiety, the pause gives us a chance to choose. It's a small sanctuary right there in the middle of life. You don't need a whole monastery, just a little sanctuary. You don't need the perfect meditation space. You don't need candles or incense or a gong. You don't need a singing bowl or a journal or essential oils, or a room where no one ever asks what's for dinner, although those things can be useful at times. They are beautiful. But the sacred pause is portable. You can practice in the car when somebody cuts you off in traffic. You can practice it at the sink when you're annoyed that nobody else washed the dishes. Before the meeting, before the text, before saying yes or before saying no. Before opening the refrigerator for the 4th time hoping a different emotional solution has appeared inside, rather than reaching for that beautiful piece of cake. You can practice it anywhere, because the pause lives in the breath, and the breath is always traveling with you. Always. That's the beautiful thing about it. The breath is always there. So let's practice it now. Wherever you are, if it feels safe, let your attention come back to the body, just like you did before. Take a slow breath in and just let it out even slower. Feel the contact beneath you, the floor, the chair, the ground, the earth. Notice your hands and your jaw, your chest and your tummy. And for just a moment, don't change anything. Here we're not forcing calm. We're creating contact with what's here now. And as you sit and breathe and feel and notice, I wonder if for just a moment you can reflect back to a small moment in your life where you tended to react quickly. Don't go to the biggest wound or the deepest trauma. Don't relive the entire family tree. Just a small, everyday moment. Maybe somebody cut you off or interrupted you. Maybe you saw a certain name pop up on your phone. Maybe you felt ignored or corrected. Maybe someone was asking you for something when you were already tired. Just notice the situation lightly. Bring it into your mind and then ask, what happens in your body when you think about it? Do you tighten? Do you hold your breath? Do you lean forward or do you pull back? Do you collapse or heat up or go numb? Do you start preparing a speech? Do it without judgment. Just notice. And then take one more breath in. Exhale nice and slow. And then imagine creating a little space around the reaction. Not pushing it away, just giving it a little room. And quietly say, pause. I can listen before I respond. Take another breath. Exhale nice and slow. And then ask, what is true right now? And then, what would love do with this truth? Not love as people-pleasing, not love as abandoning yourself, not love as pretending. Love with truth, and truth with love. Maybe love says, speak up for yourself. Maybe love says, wait a little bit. Maybe love says, just rest. Maybe love says, no. Maybe love says, apologize. Maybe love says, stop explaining yourself. Maybe love says, allow yourself to soften a little bit. Maybe love says, protect your peace. Maybe love says, just be with your breath for a moment. And just listen for a moment. Place a hand on your heart again. And just say to yourself, I don't have to repeat the old recipe. I can pause. I can breathe. I can choose. I can say no. Take another breath and return as you exhale. This is the practice. It's simple. Not always easy, but simple. And the more we practice it, the more available it comes. Because what we practice grows stronger, and the more we practice that pause, the more we'll start noticing that pause show up. At first, we may only recognize the need for the pause after the reaction, and that counts. Afterwards, we can say, oh, that was the old recipe. After the moment has passed and we didn't pause sacredly, we can say, well, that was my fear speaking. That was my nervous system trying to protect me. That was my younger self driving the bus. That noticing matters. Because then with practice, we begin to notice during the reaction, maybe in the middle of a sentence, maybe in the middle of that text, maybe in the middle of our spiral, we can catch ourselves and say, oh, I'm in it now. And that also counts. Then eventually, we may begin to notice before the reaction, when the body tightens, when the breath changes, when we feel the old recipe reaching for the spoon, and we pause. That's transformation. Every step of the way. Not never being triggered, but becoming conscious inside the trigger. Not never reacting, but returning to presence more quickly. Not becoming perfectly peaceful, but becoming more honest, more embodied, more loving, and more free. The sacred pause is how we begin to stop living from the momentum of the past. It's how we interrupt the inherited patterns. It's how we keep from pouring yesterday's fear into today's conversation. It's how we stop seasoning the present moment with this old wound. And if you've been doing that, please don't shame yourself. We all have. We all bring old ingredients into the kitchen. That's part of being human. The work is to notice it with enough love that something new becomes possible. So maybe today, as you move through your life, you don't need to change everything. You don't need to reorganize your entire soul before dinner. Just practice one pause, one breath before answering, one moment before saying yes, one moment before believing the thought or reacting to the old story, one moment before abandoning yourself, one moment to ask what is true, what would love do, what ingredient do I want to add now? And that's enough. The sacred pause is enough for today, and tomorrow we begin again. Because beginning again isn't failure. It's practice. It's devotion. It's life inviting us back to the recipe. So before we close this session, let's return to the body just one more time. Just one more time. Take a slow breath in and let it out. Feel the support beneath you. Sense the space around you. Feel your own presence. And let these words land gently. I can pause. I can breathe. I can listen. I can choose. I don't have to fix my whole life in this moment. I can just begin with one sacred pause, one breath, one new ingredient, one return to myself. That's the practice. So thank you for joining me for this episode of the Recipe Book of Life podcast. If this reflection spoke to you, I invite you to explore the Recipe Book of Life, where teachings like this continue through stories, reflections, practices, and sacred ingredients for transformation. You can also learn more about Meditate School of Mindfulness, our courses, retreat certifications, and the SVMT method of transformation, where these teachings are deepened through somatic awareness, vibration, mindfulness, and trance-informed presence. This podcast is one doorway. The book is another. The school is another. But the true doorway is always within you. So as you move through your day, may you carry the sacred pause with you. May you breathe before abandoning yourself. May you listen before reacting. May you let truth and love sit together at the same table. And may you remember that even in the ordinary kitchen of your own beautiful, complicated, sacred human life, something good is still being made. And I close with, love is the way, truth is the path, and the recipe is still unfolding. I'm Bill Gisclair-Sullivan, and I look forward to sharing more with you on the next episode.